A Dream in Red Mansions. Translated and modernized by Paul McCoard and Yuting. Chapter 3. True Loves Meet. Swink turned to see who was calling to him. To his surprise, it was Ghost, a former colleague who was dismissed at the same time as he was. Ghost was a native to Eden and had returned home. With earnest inquiry, recently he got news from the capital that all ex-officials can be reinstated. Thus, for the last few days, he was busy pulling connections and calling in favors everywhere to support his reinstatement. As soon as they greeted each other, Ghost told Swink this good news. Of course, Swink was overjoyed, and after further hurried conversation, they went their separate ways. Boreas, overhearing the news, proposed a plan promptly to Swink. Perhaps Apollo can help you out by entrusting his brother-in-law Throne. Swink grasped the hint and hurried home. Back in his quarters, he found the most recent newspaper and confirmed that the news was authentic. He broached the matter the next day with Apollo. "What a coincidence!" Apollo said happily. "Since my wife passed away leaving Bijou unsupervised with her education, my mother-in-law has already arranged to take her. But as she's ill, I've been hesitant, while also occupied with thinking of how to show my appreciation to you for being her teacher. Now the opportunity to solve both has come at last. I've already written a letter to entrust my brother-in-law with your affair, explaining my indebtedness to you and urging him to see it properly settled. In the letter I stated that any involved expenses will be taken care of, so you have nothing to worry about on that account." Swink made an elaborate bow to Apollo before daring to venture a question. "I do not know what your relation's position is. Wouldn't it be a little embarrassing to thrust myself upon him?" Apollo laughed. "Don't worry about that. My brothers-in-law are your own family, even if distant. The elder one, Thunder, inherited the title of first rank and an honorary colonel. The second one, Throne, is an undersecretary in the Department of Labor. He takes after his father, a modest man without the arrogance of the common pampered aristocrat. That is why I have addressed this letter to him. If I did not have complete confidence in his willingness to help you, I would not have put your honor at risk by soliciting his assistance. I have arranged the second day of next month for Bijou's journey to Patria. You should accompany her so both may make it to the destination safely." Swink accepted the suggestion with eager deference. Everything, he thought to himself, was turning out very satisfactorily. Apollo set about preparing presents for the family of Bijou's mother and thank-you gifts for Swink. Bijou, having just recovered from her illness, at first refused to part from her father, but her grandmother was insistent that she should go, and Apollo added his own reasons. "I'm a half-century old now, Precious, and I have no intention of taking a second wife. As such, there will be no one here to act as mother to you. It isn't either as if you had siblings to support you here. Being with your grandmother and the cousins will reduce my worry greatly. I think you ought to go." After this, Bijou's only choice was a tearful parting from her father, and head down to the boat with her nurse and women servants from the Glory Mansion who had been sent to fetch her. There was a separate boat for Swink and a couple of servant boys clinging to Bijou's boat for the journey. Once they arrived, Swink immediately went to visit Glory Mansion and presented himself before Throne. By this time, Throne had already read the letter sent by his brother-in-law, and presently he invited Swink in. Swink's imposing looks and cultivated speech made an excellent impression on Throne, who was always inclined towards giving favor to scholars. As such, the treatment he extended to Swink was exceptionally favorable, along with Apollo's recommendation. Under Throne's help, Swink was reinstated almost immediately when the petition reached the palace. Within 2 months, he was promoted to the magistracy of the capital, much higher than he had been before. On the day of Bijou's arrival on the shore of Patria, the Glory Mansion had already sent footmen and carriages waiting on the dock. She had often heard her mother say that her grandmother's home was different from the rest. The servants she had been with the past few days, from the food they ate to the clothes they wore, and even how they interacted, was quite out of the ordinary. Not to mention now she was going to the actual home. Therefore, she knew she would have to observe all the etiquette and watch her words very carefully for fear of being made into a joke by others. Passing through the city walls in a carriage, Bijou peeped from the window. She could see the bustling streets were beyond anywhere else. After driving along for what seemed at least an hour, she saw 2 great stone lions crouched, one on each side of a triple-door gateway, whose doors were embellished with animal heads. A dozen of splendidly dressed footmen sat in a row standing idly in front of the gateway. The center of the 3 gates was closed, but numerous people were going in and out of the 2 side ones, seemingly on one errand or another. A board above the center gate, upon which, written in large words, was the title, Peace Mansion. Bijou realized that this must be where Thor lived. The carriage proceeded some distance more down the street, and presently there was another triple gate, just as intricate as the first, this time with the words, Glory Mansion. Her driver guided the carriage in by one of the side gates, and after about 200 yards, they stopped at a beautiful ornamental inner gate. The old women servants came forward and helped Bijou to get out. Led by an elderly attendant, Bijou passed through the ornamental gate into a courtyard, where she saw many rooms and balconies running along its sides and a covered passageway through the center. The back of the courtyard was partially hidden by a screen of polished marble set in an elaborate red mahogany frame. Passing round the screen and through a small reception hall beyond it, they entered the large courtyard of the mansion's principal rooms. These were housed in an imposing 5-frame building decorated with the most dazzling carved and painted beams, which faced them across the courtyard. Some brightly dressed maids were sitting on the steps of the main building opposite the entrance, as though they were waiting for Bijou's party. At the appearance of the visitors, they rose to their feet and came forward with smiling faces to welcome them. "Your timing is impeccable. Her old ladyship was only just at this moment asking about you." 3 or 4 of them ran enthusiastically to open the door, while another of them announced in loud tones, "Miss Wood is here!" Bijou entered the room and saw a silver-haired old lady advancing to meet her, supported on either side by a servant. She knew that this must be her grandmother, and would have begun the customary greeting of her family, but before she could, her grandmother had pressed her to her heart with the cries of, "My child!" and burst into loud sobs, while all those present wept in sympathy. Bijou felt herself crying as though she could never stop. After some time, everyone had calmed down, and Lady Matriarch introduced the family that was present. "This is your Uncle Throne's wife, Aunt Crown. This is your Uncle Thunder's wife, Aunt Charter. This is Morale, the wife of your cousin Pillar, who died." Bijou greeted each of them in turn. "Send for the girls," called out Lady Matriarch. "Tell them that Bijou has arrived, so they need not do their lessons today." 2 maids immediately went off to do her bidding. Presently, 3 girls arrived, attended by some maids. The first girl was of average height and beauty, with a gentle and quiet face. The second girl looked tall and slender. Her face was oval-shaped, with sharp, expressive eyes that seemed very calculating, yet animated with elegance. The third girl, Bijou noted, was rather undersized. Bijou rose to meet them and exchanged courtesies. After she was seated, a maid served tea, and a conversation began on the subject of her mother, which upset the old lady all over again. "Of all my children, your mother was my favorite," she sobbed, "and now she's been the first to go, without being able to see her face again before the end." Holding Bijou's hand, she again burst into tears. The rest of the company did their best to comfort her, until at last she had calmed down once more. Everyone now focused on Bijou. They saw that she was still young, though clearly had a splendid education from her refined speech and manners. However, inside her fragile, even weak-looking body, there was still an air of indescribable beauty and grace. They asked if she was suffering from some sickness, and if she had been taking any medicine. "I have always been like this," said Bijou flatly. "I have been taking medicine ever since I could remember, and have been looked at by almost every doctor in the country, but nothing has worked. When I was 3, there was a one-eyed monk who came to my family wanting to take me away to bring me up as a nun. Of course, Mother and Father wouldn't hear of it, so he said, 'Since you are not willing to part with this child, I am afraid her illness will never get better except under 2 conditions. She must never cry, nor see any relations other than her own parents.' We all took him for a madman. I'm still taking ginseng glory pills." "Well, that's handy," said Lady Matriarch. "I'll just ask for yours to be made with mine, as I take various pills myself." She had scarcely finished speaking when someone could be heard talking and laughing in very loud voice in the backyard. "Oh, how dreadful! I'm late!" trilled the voice. "I've missed the arrival of our cousin." "Everyone around here goes about with bated breath," thought Bijou. "Who could this insolent person be?" As she wondered, a beautiful young woman entered from the room behind, surrounded by numerous maids. She was dressed quite differently from the others present, sticking out and gleaming like a fairy princess, with sparkling jewels and exquisite embroideries. Her tignon was enclosed in a circlet of gold filigree and clustered pearls, which was composed of a flying phoenix. Her dress was made of dark red silk damask, with a pattern of flowers and butterflies in raised gold thread. On her waist, the side of her dress was fastened with a green silk girdle. She had, moreover, a face that beamed with smiles and eyes that appeared gentle yet shrewd. The slender body moved with such gracefulness, one could not help but like her, and fear her at the same time. "You don't know her," said the Lady Matriarch merrily, seeing the expression on Bijou's face. "She's a holy terror. What in my day we would call a peppercorn. You just call her Peppercorn Phoenix. She'll know who you mean." Bijou was at a loss to know how she was to address this Peppercorn Phoenix, until one of the cousins whispered that it was Cousin Jasper's wife. She remembered her mother saying that Bijou's Uncle Thunder had a son called Jasper who was married to the niece of her Uncle Throne's wife, Lady Crown. Bijou smiled, greeting Phoenix by her correct name. Phoenix took Bijou by the hand and studied her carefully before conducting her back to her seat. "She is a true beauty, Granny. I didn't believe that such a beautiful creature could exist until today, and everything about her is so distinguished. Looking at her must be like looking in a mirror for you at that age. But poor little thing, what a cruel fate to have lost Auntie like that." Phoenix then dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I've only just recovered," laughed Matriarch. "Don't you go and try to start me off again. Besides, as you can see, your little cousin is not very strong, and we've only just managed to get her cheered up. So wipe your tears and be your usual merry self." Phoenix at once exchanged her grief for happiness without missing a beat. "Yes, of course. Seeing my little cousin here put everything else out of my mind. It made me want to laugh and cry all at the same time." Phoenix chuckled before continuing. "I'm afraid I forgot about you, Granny. I deserve to be punished, don't I?" She grabbed Bijou by the hand and began questioning her about her upbringing. "How old are you, dear? How's your school? Please don't feel homesick here. If there's anything you want to eat or play with, just come and tell me. There is nothing I can't procure, and you must tell me if any of the maids or old nannies are nasty to you. I shall deal with them promptly." As Bijou answered the questions and gave appropriate responses, Phoenix turned to the servants. "Have Miss Wood's things been brought in yet? You'd better hurry up and get a couple of rooms swept out for her and her women to rest in." While Phoenix was speaking, the servants brought in tea and various plates of food, the distribution of which she proceeded to supervise in person. Bijou noticed her Aunt Crown interrupted Phoenix and asked her to come to the side while asking a question. "Have this month's salaries been distributed yet?" "Yes, I have. Also, just now I went with some of the women to the upstairs storeroom at the back to look for that satin. We looked everywhere and in every chest, but couldn't find any like the one you described yesterday." "Oh well, if you can't find it, it doesn't really matter," said Lady Crown. "You'd better pick out a couple of lengths of satin to have made up into clothes for your little cousin here. If you think of it, send someone round in the evening to fetch them." "Already done," Phoenix answered merrily. "I knew she was going to arrive within a day or two, so I had some brought out in readiness. They are waiting back at your place for your approval. If you think they are all right, they can be sent over straight away." Lady Crown smiled and nodded at Phoenix with satisfaction. After they had finished eating and drinking, Lady Matriarch ordered 2 old nurses to take Bijou round to see her uncles. But Thunder's wife, Lady Charter, hurriedly rose to her feet and suggested that it would be more convenient if she were to take her niece round herself. "Very well," said Lady Matriarch. "You go now, then. There's no need for you to come back afterwards." So together with Lady Crown, Lady Charter went off with Bijou. A carriage painted dark blue was drawn up in front of the ornamental gateway by some pages. Lady Charter ascended hand in hand with Bijou and was driven out of the side gate, passing the main gates of the Glory Mansion, entering a big black lacquered gate where they stopped. Holding Bijou by the hand, Lady Charter led her into a courtyard in the middle of what she imagined must once have been part of the Glory Mansion's gardens. After they passed through another gateway into the quarters, there was a smaller scale and quiet elegance of the halls, quite unlike the magnificence and imposing splendor they had just come from. Ornamental trees and artificial rock formations were to be seen on every hand. As they entered the main reception hall, a couple of exquisite maids who had been waiting in readiness came forward to greet them. Lady Charter asked Bijou to be seated, while she sent a servant to call Thunder. After a considerable wait, the servant returned with a message from Thunder. "The master says he hasn't been well these days, so he doesn't feel up to meeting anyone. He says, 'Tell Miss Wood to restrain herself from grief for her mother outwardly, and not to feel homesick. Take this as her own home. Her cousins might not be clever girls, but they should still be good company to help ease her mind. She must speak up at once if anything distresses her here. Just make sure not to snitch to others.'" Bijou thanked Thunder and sat for another 15 minutes before rising to leave. Lady Charter was very pressing that she should have a meal with her. Bijou replied with a smile, "Though it was very kind of you to offer, and I really shouldn't refuse, I still must pay my respects to Uncle Throne, and fear it would be disrespectful if I were to arrive late. I hope I might accept it on another occasion." "No problem," Lady Charter laughed, and instructed the old nurses to see her to thrones in the same carriage. Presently, they re-entered the Glory Mansion. The old nurses escorted Bijou through a stone walk which ran all the way up to the main gate. Turning right, they led her down a roofed passageway, along the back of a south-facing hall, then through an inner gate into a large courtyard. The big building at the head of the courtyard was connected at each end to galleries running through the length of the side buildings. The whole house formed an architectural wonder of great magnificence than anything Bijou had seen yet that day, from which she concluded that this must be the main hall of the whole mansion. High overhead on the wall facing her as she entered the hall was a great blue board framed in gilded lions, on which was written in large golden letters, "The Hall of Glorious Bliss." A long high table of carved red sandalwood, ornamented with lions, stood near the wall underneath. In the center of this was a huge antique bronze incense burner, a yard tall, covered with green polish. On the wall just above the burner hung a large canvas with a painting of a lion emerging from a cave into bright sunlight. The bell was flanked on one side by a smaller antique bronze vessel with a pattern of gold inlay, and on the other by a crystal bowl. At each side of the table stood a row of 8 bright yellow mahogany armchairs with their backs to the wall, and above the chairs hung, one on each side, a pair of ebony boards inlaid with a couplet in letters of gold. Distinguished guests in the house talking about speciality. Splendid uniforms in the hall, bustling with vitality. Lady Crown did not normally spend her leisure hours in the main reception hall, but in a smaller room on the east side of the same building. As such, the nurses conducted Bijou through the door into this side apartment. Here, there was a large couch underneath the window, covered with a scarlet cashmere rug. In the middle of the couch was a dark red bolster with a pattern of medallions in the form of tiny lions, and a long russet green seating strip in the same pattern. A low rose-shaped table of colored lacquer work stood at each side. On the left hand one was a small, square incense burner. On the right hand one was a Zhu Guanyao narrow-waisted vase with some freshly cut flowers in it. In the part of the room next to the couch, there was a row of 4 big chairs against the wall. Everything overall was modest luxury. The old woman invited Bijou up on the couch, but guessing it was where her uncle and aunt lived, she deemed it more proper to sit on one of the chairs against the wall below. The maid served tea, and before she had time to finish it, a smiling maid came in wearing a dress of red damask. "The mistress asks Miss Wood to come to the other side, please." The old nurses now led Bijou to a reception room on the other side of the courtyard. This too had a large couch. It was bisected by a long, low table piled with books and tea things. Lady Crown was seated on a black satin cushion and leaning against another backrest of black satin on the opposite side. Lady Crown motioned for Bijou on the couch, but deeming this must be her Uncle Throne's place, Bijou would only sit next to her aunt, rather than in the seat of honor. "Your uncle is on retreat today," said Lady Crown. "He will see you another time. There is, however, something I have got to talk to you about. The 3 girls are very well-behaved children that I can depend on not to go too far, and to study or sew together with you." Lady Crown paused and looked Bijou over. "There is only one thing that worries me. I have a little monster of a son who tyrannizes all over the rest of this household. He has gone off to the temple today in fulfillment of a vow, and is not yet back, but you will see what I mean this evening. What's right is never to take any notice of him. None of your girl cousins dare provoke him." Bijou had been told by her mother that she had a boy cousin who was born with a piece of jade in his mouth, who was exceptionally naughty and easy to temper. He hated to study, but liked to spend all his time with the girls, and because Lady Matriarch doted on him so much, no one dared to correct him. She realized that it must be this cousin Lady Crown was referring to. "Do you mean the boy born with the jade, Aunt?" she asked. "Mother often told me about him. She said that he was 1 year older than me, and that his name was Nephrite. Though he was very willful, my mother said he always behaved nicely to girls. Now that I am here, I imagine I'll be spending all my time with my girl cousins and not in the same part of the house as any of the boys. Because of this, wouldn't there be no chance of me provoking him?" Lady Crown gave an amused smile. "You know little of how things are here. Nephrite is a law unto himself because your grandmother is so fond of him that she has thoroughly spoiled him. He has been living with the girls since he was little. As long as the girls take no notice of him, things are smooth and peaceful. But once they give him the tiniest bit of encouragement, he'll become excited and get into endless mischief." Lady Crown looked severe. "That is why I hope for you to ignore him. He can be all sweet-talking 1 minute, but ranting and raving like a lunatic the next. So don't believe anything he says." Bijou promised to follow her aunt's advice. Just then a maid came in with a message that Lady Matriarch said it was time for dinner, whereupon Lady Crown took Bijou by the hand and hurried her through a back door. Passing along a veranda, they came to a corner gate through which they passed into an alleyway, running north and south. At the south end, it traversed next to a large building with a smaller front, which was called the Mother-Daughter Building. At the north end was a white painted screen wall with a small courtyard in which stood a little house. "That," said Lady Crown, pointing to the little house, "is where your cousin Jasper's wife Phoenix lives. Talk to her if there is anything you need." There were a few young pages at the gate in the courtyard who, when they saw Lady Crown coming, all stood attention with hands at their sides. Lady Crown now led Bijou along a gallery into the courtyard behind Lady Matriarch's apartments. As soon as the servants saw Lady Crown, they began to arrange the table and chairs for dinner. The ladies of the house themselves took part in the service. Morale brought in the cups, Phoenix laid out the chopsticks, and Lady Crown brought in the soup. The table at which Lady Matriarch presided had 2 empty chairs on either side. Phoenix tried to seat Bijou in the one on the left, nearer to her grandmother, in honor which she strenuously resisted until her grandmother explained that as she was a guest, the place was properly hers. Only then did she sit. Lady Matriarch then ordered Lady Crown to sit, at which point the 3 cousin girls, Sapphire, Ruby, and Opal, also sat down. While Morale and Phoenix stood by the table helping to distribute food, there were numerous maids and serving women in the outer room, yet not even a cough was heard throughout the meal. When they had finished eating, a maid served each diner with tea. Bijou, anxious to conform, accepted the tea, but as she did so, another maid offered a spittoon, from which she inferred that the tea was for rinsing her mouth with. And it was not until they had all rinsed out their mouths and washed their hands that another cup of tea was served, this time for drinking. Lady Matriarch dismissed her lady servers, as she wished to enjoy a little chat with the young girls, without the restraint of any grown-up presence. Lady Crown obediently rose to her feet and, after exchanging a few words, went out, taking Morale and Phoenix with her. Lady Matriarch then asked Bijou what books she was studying. "I have only been studying the Great Learning for a while," said Bijou, and inquired in turn what books her cousins were currently engaged in. "Gracious child, they don't study like that," laughed her grandmother. "They can barely even read or write. Perhaps you should be their teacher," she continued, roaring with laughter. While they were speaking, a flurry of footsteps could be heard outside, and a maid came in cheerfully to say that Nephrite was back. "I wonder," thought Bijou, "just what kind of graceless creature this Nephrite is going to be." The young gentleman who entered had a small, jewel-encrusted gold coronet on the top of his head. He was wearing a bright red robe with a pattern of flowers and butterflies in 2 shades of gold. At the waist was a belt of colored silks, a jacket made of blue silk damask with tasseled borders, black satin boots with thick white soles. His face was as bright as the moon with eyes dark, yet clear as a pond after a fresh rain. The natural facial expression of him was just as approachable, and even when angry it seemed like it remained smiling. Lastly, around his neck was a gold chain necklace that came together at the center with woven silks tied around the famous jade. Bijou looked at him with huge astonishment. She swore she was experiencing déjà vu. However, Nephrite went straight past her and saluted his grandmother, who told him to come after he had seen his mother, whereupon he turned around and walked straight out again. Rather soon he was back once more, this time dressed in a completely different outfit. The coronet and circlet had been removed. The robe and jacket were changed for a worn-looking bright rose-colored shirt, sprigged with waves and clouds. He was still wearing the gold necklace and jade as before. A padlock-shaped amulet and a lucky charm hung on either side of the jade. A pair of ivy-colored embroidered silk pants were thrust into brocade socks and thick-soled crimson slippers. She was even more struck than before by his fresh complexion. One might think with how bright the face was beaming, he was wearing blush and rouge. "How dare you change clothes before welcoming our visitor?" Lady Matriarch chided when she saw Nephrite. "Where are your manners?" Nephrite had already caught sight of a slender, delicate girl, whom he deduced must be his aunt's daughter, and quickly went over to greet her. Then, taking a seat, he studied her attentively. She was very different from other girls he knew, more beautiful and radiant than anything else. Her brows furrowed in thought gave the impression of a frown, while her smiling eyes showed no sign of merriment, with glistening tears filling them. The face was tender, yet looked melancholy, as though she had already experienced a lifetime of sorrow. While the frame appeared sickly and delicate, she was an elegant flower floating on water, and a willow gently moving in the wind. After staring for some time, Nephrite laughed. "I have seen this cousin before." "What an absurd thing to say," Lady Matriarch chastised. "She's never come up this way." "Well, perhaps not," said Nephrite, "but her face seems familiar. It feels like I'm meeting her again after a long time. Déjà vu, even." "All the better," declared Lady Matriarch. "That means you should get along well together." Nephrite moved his chair up beside Bijou, recommenced his scrutiny. "What books are you studying, cousin?" "I haven't begun yet," said Bijou, calculating that she should be modest, so as not to accidentally provoke him. "It's been quite a long time since my lesson was paused. I can barely read and write." "What's your name?" Bijou told him. "What's your nickname?" "I haven't got one." Nephrite laughed. "I'll give you one. I think Beautiful Frowner would suit you perfectly." "Where would you come up with that?" asked Ruby sarcastically. "In the Encyclopedia of Men and Objects, Ancient and Modern, it says that somewhere in the West there is a gemstone called Bijou that can be used to pencil eyebrows. Her name is Bijou, and she knits her brows together in a little frown. I think it's perfect for her." "I believe you just made it up," said Ruby scornfully. "What if I did?" Nephrite shrugged his shoulders in a careless way. "Besides, in the Great Learning there are lots of books with made-up contents." He turned his attention back to Bijou. "Have you got a jade?" Everyone else seemed confused by this question, but Bijou was able to discern what he was talking about. "No," Bijou answered. "That jade of yours is a very rare object. You can't expect everybody to have one." For all her caution prior, Bijou had no idea the effect these words would have. Nephrite was set off instantly into one of his famous bouts of hysteria. Grabbing the jade from his neck, he hurled it violently on the floor, as if to smash it, and began stomping it angrily. "Rare object! Pah! Rare object indeed! What's the magic about this stupid stone that can't even tell which people are better than others? I don't want it!" The maid seemed terrified and rushed forward to pick it up, while Lady Matriarch clung to Nephrite in alarm. "Wretched boy! Curse or strike someone if you're in a nasty temper, but why go smashing the jade which your very life depends on?" "None of the girls has one," exclaimed Nephrite hysterically with tears streaming down his face. "Only I have one. I've always hated this. Now this new cousin, who is more beautiful than an angel, arrives, but she doesn't have one either. So what is the point of having it when it does no good?" "Your cousin did have a jade once," said Lady Matriarch quickly, rushing to think, while coaxing him like a little child. "But because when your aunt died, she couldn't bear to leave her little girl behind. So they had to bury the jade with her to keep her spirit in peace. Whenever Auntie's spirit looks at the jade, it would be just like looking at her own little girl again. So when your cousin said she doesn't have one, it was only because she didn't want to boast about the meritorious thing she did when she gave it to her mama." She then looked at Nephrite sternly. "Now you put yours on again and pray your mother doesn't find out how you've been behaving." As she was saying this, she took the jade from a maid and hung it round his neck for him. Nephrite reflected for a moment or two on what she had said and gave no further resistance. At this point, a nanny came in to inquire what room Bijou was to sleep in. "Move Nephrite into the toasty room with me," instructed Lady Matriarch, "and put Miss Wood in the jade closet bed. We will wait until winter is over and then arrange the rooms to have them settled." "Granny," Nanny pleaded, "I'll be perfectly all right next to the closet bed. There's no need to move me into your room. You know how noisily I sleep. I would just keep you awake." Lady Matriarch, after a moment's reflection, gave her consent. When she was assigning the servants for Bijou's attendance, Phoenix had already sent across the bedding for the night. Bijou had brought only 2 of her own people with her from home. One was her old wet nurse, Nanny Dogwood. The other was a 10-year-old maid called Sparrow. Feeling Sparrow too young and the other too old, Lady Matriarch gave Bijou one of her own maids, Nightingale. These arrangements completed, Nightingale accompanied Bijou to the closet bed, while Nephrite's wet nurse, Nanny Plum, and his chief maid, Raider, settled him down for the night in a big bed on the other side of the canopy. Like Nightingale, Raider had previously been one of Lady Matriarch's own maids. She had a certain dogged streak in her nature, which made her utterly devoted to Lady Matriarch as long as she was her servant. She became just as exclusively and single-mindedly devoted to Nephrite when her services were transferred to him. Ever since she found his character eccentric, her simple devotion frequently compelled her to admonish his behavior, and when, as inevitably happened, he took no notice of what she said, she would become rather distressed. That night, after Nephrite and Nanny Plum were already asleep, Raider could hear that Bijou and Nightingale had still not settled down, so she tiptoed through the curtains and politely inquired what was the matter. Bijou invited her to sit down on the bed. The Nightingale proceeded to tell her what was troubling her new mistress. "Miss Wood is all upset. She's been crying her eyes out because on her very first day here, she already has started Mr. Hopeful on one of his theatrics. She says that if that jade had actually broken, it would be all her fault. That's why she's been terribly upset. It's been a job trying to calm her." "You mustn't take it like this, miss," said Raider calmly. "You'll see him do much stranger things than that before he's finished. If you allow yourself to feel hurt every time he carries on like that, he will always be hurting you. Please try not to be so sensitive." "I'll bear that in mind," Bijou thanked her. She turned and looked at Raider with her swollen eyes. "But what's the origin of that jade? How come there are words on it?" "The whole of the family doesn't even know the origin of that jade. I heard it was in his mouth when he was born," answered Raider in a wondrous voice. "Let me fetch it for you to have a look." "Never mind," Bijou immediately stopped her, grabbing her arm. "It's getting late. It can wait until tomorrow." They talked a little longer before settling down and finally falling asleep.